Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and this week we're going to be talking about one of everybody's most exciting things, testing. Testing your disaster recovery plans, your emergency plans, your crisis management plans, your business continuity plans, just testing overall. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at how we plan for them, how we execute them, how we get the buy-in and the value. Along the way, I will give you some examples on what you need to consider when you're putting these tests together, when you're planning, when to do a lot of planning and when not to do a lot of planning. Because remember, we're actually trying to test the plan, not plan the test. And when you're first getting started, sometimes you need a little bit more planning and coordination. Unless you're in an organization that's willing to take a hit and you just go all out, bang, we're in disaster mode. Not everybody can do that, I'm sure. So we'll go through that to give some examples. A lot of what I'm going to be going through is actually in one of my books, Testing Disaster and Business Continuity Plans, How to Plan and Execute Successful Tests. So I'm going to be going through that. Not everything, of course. I've got to keep some secrets to myself. But we'll go through some of what's in the book here and hopefully give you some information that you can take back to your organizations and start looking at your plans on how can we make our test better? What do we need to consider? Who needs to be involved? And maybe also figure out why some tests in the past haven't worked the way you wanted them to. Because sometimes you have a great big scope and you've got lots of people, but everyone's doing their own thing. So you never actually coordinate and people to work together to reach the same goals and objectives. So that's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. And I also want to say that if there are other topics that you want to talk about or come on the show and be a guest, feel free to send me an email at info at stone-road, and by dash I mean the hyphen sign, .com, and give me some suggestions. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to hear? What do you need help with? And maybe we can go find a guest, or maybe you could be the guest and come on and talk about something that you're passionate about with regards to emergency response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. So please feel free to do that. I really want to have you involved with the show because the show is here for you, and to help you and talk about other things. And maybe even if I'm lucky, I can snag a couple of people for lessons learned and we can talk about what maybe you did during a situation and how you dealt with it and were able to move forward. And if they let you, tell us what went wrong. But other than that, let's get started. Let's talk about testing this week. And the first subject I'd like to touch on is, the buy-in and the value of testing. Let's face it, testing validates what we've done. We spend a lot of time, hopefully, meeting with lots of people and documenting, activities and roles and responsibilities and all kinds, sometimes even timing, all kinds of steps and things that we need to consider with our IT infrastructures and our applications and our networks and, our operating procedures, on the business side and how our call centers are going to work, our telephony and all kinds of different things. But they're not worth anything if we're not validating that they work. Sometimes we can spend up to a year documenting all this stuff and we get to a test only to find out that things have changed due to projects that have been implemented. So we have to validate these plans and proactively identify what we need to do, to make them real and valid and, living, breathing, either documents, whether they're binders or the information captured in an online application that you may be using. Either way, because you can print from those applications as well, you can still end up with a big binder somewhere, But they don't mean anything if we're not validating that, yes, this is correct. This is the right way we need to do it. This is what we need. These are the resources, both physical, financial, and, from people. This is what we need to do it. So there's a lot of benefits to testing, and if people are wondering, ask yourself some questions. have the organization ask itself some questions. Will these tests validate these plans that we put together and the people that are involved with them? Are we meeting legislative and compliance requirements? Because there's a lot of that in place now. A lot of companies are under a lot more scrutiny than ever before, and part of that scrutiny, and there's standards out there, the SOX requirements, the ISO standards, the BCI, the disaster recovery standards, NFPA 1600, CSA. There's so many, and they all have testing as a part of it. So if we're following some of these standards, or we have to respond to these compliance issues that we all deal with in our organizations, then we've got to be able to follow those legislative and standard activities that we need to address. And part of that is testing. That's a big component to it. Will these tests increase the organization's overall business continuity management awareness? Well, hopefully, yes. So increasing BCM awareness is for the entire organization. It's not just for those that are on crisis management teams or, that are involved with the plan's development or the execution of those plans. It's everybody, even people that may not have any activity to do. It has to increase their awareness, because the newest employee that walks in that building needs to know that when a disaster occurs, what they're going to do, what they need to do. And it could be just sit at home and wait for a phone call or an email. And if that's their role, well, that's what they need to do. If we don't validate that the people we need to go to other locations or sign in from home, because a lot of people have that, if we don't validate that, then that person could just be disappearing. You don't know where they are. Are they in the burning building? Have they gone off to a coffee shop? Are they at home sending messages on Twitter and Skype and Facebook and everything else, saying that, oh, my company had a problem and I don't know what's going on? They're getting the company's message out there when they shouldn't be. So you need to validate everyone's role and increase that awareness for everyone. And testing does that, especially if you're doing larger types of tests, which we'll get into further down the road, the different types you can do. But it increases everything. Testing also provides a benchmark for future tests. If you start off small with just small component testing, we're going to bring up this application or this application over here or this server over there. The next time it's okay. Well, it's this application. Now let's do two applications. How that talk to each other? How are we going to do that? And measure the timing and everything the activities that go around it. And each time you build on each one so that you can get to the point where if something does occur, you've tested all applications, all servers, all communication channels, everything you need, your your vendors, your senior executive. Everybody knows what to do, when they're to do it, where to go, and how to do it, and what tools are needed to do it. So ask yourself a lot of those kinds of questions, and keep that in mind when you're putting your test together, and you're trying to get the buy-in from senior executives. We need to test because, I don't know about you, but I ran into a lot of pushback, especially from, I don't like separating areas within our organization, but a lot of business groups, their concern was you're going to impact our operations. Well, whatever you do, you don't want to be interrupting their operations. You don't want clients, and vendors and suppliers to be impacted by your tests. As much as you want to test those pieces, you don't want to be, having them, even yourself, being impacted because someone's doing a test. If you're calling into a call center, you don't want to be put on hold, or listening to a pre-recorded message for 30 minutes saying, we're testing right now, so too bad, call back. That's not going to happen, and that's a concern that, some units are going to have. And you have to consider that when you're looking for buy-in. Also, mention to executives and to get the buy-in that this is a positive thing. There's teams that are going to be expected to work together. When a disaster occurs and you have to respond, that may not even barely even know each other. I know when I read a couple of large tests many years ago, we had 3 countries, 5 locations, and I think the last count was at least 170 people, in all those different locations, different time zones. So a lot of those people, they didn't know each other. But with the test, they were able to find out what each other does, and it actually helped a business relationship in the end. Even when the test wasn't going on, people were able to reach out to others and work on sometimes incidents or problems or projects that came up. They could actually reach out. It was a very proactive approach, and it's a benefit a lot of people don't see. When they're testing, they just think right away, test, just go do it. But there's other benefits to doing that. You also want to look at buy-in with your, what your competitors are doing, because you want to go talk to your executives and say, hey, our competitor, ABC company, they had a disaster, and look how they messed it up. Or look how great they did. Can we do the same? Are we in the same position they are? Are we going to make the same mistakes? And of course, you're the first time you say that, somebody's going to turn around and say, oh, we're much better than they are anyway because we have a larger market share or more revenue. Well, that's not the driver for disaster response. That's not the reason. Just because you have more revenue doesn't mean you're going to be able to respond to a disaster better. It just means you can afford more. But if you have a competitor or someone down the street that's had a disaster, take a look at yourselves. Look in the mirror. Can we do the same thing? Would we be that good? Would we be that bad? And do an assessment, an honest assessment, and find out, where do we stand right now? And go through that. And if you do have something in place, whether it be documented or applications or, spoken, where people just talk, this is what we're going to do, and everybody knows that. And I've actually been to a couple of places where nothing was documented, but literally everyone could rhyme off exactly the activities that they would do and who would do it and where they would go and everything. But there still might be gaps in those processes. There still could be gaps in what they're saying. There could be assumptions being made. I don't know how many times you've heard this, but I hear it all the time in my project management roles and in my business continuity and disaster recovery roles, that such and such group knows what we want. That group knows what we want. Oh, they know about this. And you know what? That's not the case. When a disaster occurs, you can't have assumptions. I like saying that the only assumption that'll be proven correct in a disaster is that all your assumptions are wrong, because you don't know what's going to happen. So getting value is you can validate those assumptions. You can either say that, yes, this is correct, this is exactly what such and such group is going to do, or say that, no, we were way off and we need to do some more digging and investigation with that group because what we thought they would do isn't even close. We're way off base and who knows what could actually happen. So you want to do that. You want to ask your questions. You want to be collaborative. You don't want to be disruptive. You want to make sure that, over time you're addressing all of your regulatory requirements, and if you're trying to go for some sort of a certification like the ISO standard or any of the others, you want to make sure you're doing what you need to do, show that what you're going to do, and whether you identify gaps or not, say this is how we're going to address and maintain this going forward. Because I don't know any company in the world, anywhere, whether it be large, small, or medium-sized, there are always projects and things happening. Change is constant. So that means our testing has to change all the time, all our documentation has to change, and everything that we put towards it needs to change. Everything we do in disaster recovery, business continuity, I like to say is, we're almost a shadow of what, is really happening out in the production world of a company. We have to be able to recreate this somehow. It may not be exactly the same, but all the critical pieces there, we have to be able to bring back. We have to get it up and running with as minimal impact to our customers, our vendors, our staff, ourselves as possible. That's just the way it is, And you go through and you find all the positive aspects of testing, because let's face it, testing can be a state of mind. And by that, I mean, testing, well, let's take a step back. Think of yourself back in school when your teacher, your professor, whether it be grade 1, grade 10, university, when you heard the term test, it makes a lot of people nervous. So sometimes you're just exercising plans instead. Exercising is more positive. As an expression goes, you cannot fail an exercise, but you can fail a test. And if you're like me, because it happened many times, I would do well on homework, I would do well on assignments, I would do well in the class answering questions, but when it came to a test, that didn't show. So when you say in an organization, we're going to test our disaster recovery plan, sometimes that kind of makes people nervous because they're going to be judged. If they find gaps or something wrong, it's going to look to them as though they're doing something wrong. Or they're going to think that executive management think they're doing something wrong, when the whole point of the exercise and test is to actually find the gaps. But people aren't going to think like that. So you have to put a positive spin on it. You can't just say that, you don't want to have negative connotations, and you don't just want to say we're going to test, we're going to exercise. You may test it further down the road when you think you found as many gaps as you can and you've tested everything you possibly can, from your crisis management team role and responsibilities to sending out messages on your notification applications to recreating mainframe recovery and all the data, and users are coming in and everything is working tickety-boo. Well, then you may turn around and say, you know what? We're not going to plan the next test at all, just on such and such a date and time. Bingo. We are now in disaster mode. Or, I even know of one place where I went for a meeting one day, and they said that a couple of weeks earlier, they had just, on the spur of the moment, declared a disaster. Only 3 or 4 people in the company knew, and there was panic for a couple of hours. People had no idea what to do. So, and they turned around and they said, we're testing, and that freaked people out. And so, be careful on how you want to phrase it. I tend to use testing and exercise, for these next few episodes, interchangeably, but at the same time, think about it, where you are in your maturity level of your program, whether you want to be testing people, or exercising them, because you're testing the plan, you're not testing the people, right? You don't want to make people feel bad. So put a positive spin on it, to make people want to find the gaps and do better. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back, and we'll continue talking about testing your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. This week, part 1 of our talk on testing. Before our break, we went through, getting buy-in and talking about that. And now in this segment, I'd like to talk about what parts of the business continuity program should we be testing. Now, I could really give a quick short answer and say everything, but that doesn't help anybody out there, right? But everything needs to be tested, really, in general. At some point, you've got to go through and validate that everything you've put together, all your assumptions, like I mentioned before, are correct. So we'll start off with things like the crisis management team, the roles and responsibilities. If by chance that was created in a silo, by a practitioner, sitting at their desk and referring to a lot of standards and other information that's out there, and their knowledge as well, and just wrote the responsibilities, well, it needs to be validated, because the people that are on the crisis management team want to make sure that what they are responsible for is assigned to the correct person. Sometimes it's not always the right person who's been assigned a task. I know I did work with one team client, and we drafted the roles and responsibilities for the their client side, and put a crisis management team together. And then when we presented it to them, the senior executive, they said, you know what, we're not really the ones who'd run this. It would be such and such person. And that person was in a completely different area. But because they had been with the company for so long and knew the business so well, they were the better person to run that and make some of those initial decisions. We wouldn't have found that out if we had gone forward with testing, and all the people we thought would have been answering questions or performing activities would have been wrong. We would have just fallen down completely flat on our face. So, crisis management teams, if they do some initial assessment work, they hear that there's an incident, then let them go through that. How would they do that? How would they contact each other? Where would they meet? What would they talk about? What information do they expect to receive? You can test all of that. You can put a situation together. I do remember in one, actually we did it a couple of times, with a notification application we had, where we sent out notifications for disasters or incidents, and our help desk or service desk used it as well. But if we had a disaster, the vice president of IT would actually log on and send this canned message that we had to a pre-designated list, and he went through it. He'd never used it before, so we actually made that part of a test scope. He learned how to use it, and then when we declared disaster now, he actually went into his office, logged on, and sent off a message, and he goes, I know how to do this now. We'd kind of assumed that he did. So again, you want to validate. Your emergency response, a lot of times people say, when the alarms go off, we evacuate the building, and then take things from there. Well, you've got people going down the stairwells, sending off messages to friends, and you got people, and I've seen it, who stand back, kind of hiding behind a cubicle wall so they can continue working. And you've got people that just go off in all directions when you get outside, when especially if it's a multi-unit building and you've got lots of different companies in there, you've got a designated area for each one so you can find out where your staff is. And I've seen it where people start walking down the street, going to the local coffee shop, and then just watch what's going on. Well, you want to test so that everyone knows where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do, what the floor wardens are supposed to do. And those are the people that, hold the doors open or direct everyone to the nearest stairwell. Either they're wearing a red hat or a vest or something that clearly identifies them, who they are. They want to test their role too, because part of their role is to also walk around and make sure everyone's out of the building, and then come down with their report saying, Bob is still up on the fourth floor, refuses to come down for the drill. And if you had listened to our talk with the chief fire prevention officer from here in Guelph, where I live, he said that, he expects, companies and facilities to have that in place, that when he and his people arrive, that they have a single contact to talk to. Well, if you don't document and validate that role, how that poor fire marshal is probably going to have 10 different floor wardens coming up to them, each giving them different, pieces of information that could conflict for all we know, right? And he's not going to know what's going on. And that can be very frustrating for the firefighters and the first responders trying to do that. So you want to validate all of that. It goes without saying your technology recovery plans. Let's face it, you're going to do that. From the recovering the network to recovering a mainframe, to restoring and recovering data, to making sure that you can get to the web and your email, of course. There were times when people used to say, well, we can get by with 2, 3, I won't say 3 days because not sure anybody would really say that anymore, but, they can get by a day, or two without email, but because they could use fax, or they pick up a telephone. Well, now not a lot of people use fax. I can't remember the last time I used it. It's all email, through my smartphone, and that's what everyone's going to be doing. So you want to be testing that, your IT recovery is all up and running, from the smallest pieces to the larger pieces. Like I said, the mainframe and data and all the other different components, and that they all talk to each other and validate on the IT side and on the user side. It's one thing to say that everything is on, and you see all the pretty green and orange and different colored lights on the back of servers. Everything's plugged in, cables are all over the place. Everything works. That's fine. But it's different when a user actually logs on and says, well, everything is on, but I can't get to it. It's not recognizing me. I can't do anything. I can log on, but now I can't get to an application. Or now I can get to an application, but it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Or even worse, where's my data? I can't do anything. So you start off from the small areas and you build up, right? But it's got to be validated. There's also the business continuity plans, or what the departments are going to do. A lot of times, at the beginning I said, there's assumptions, and I've been through this where while IT is rebuilding the IT infrastructure, business is saying, well, they know what we need. We'll just log on and we'll start. Well, what are you doing in the meantime? What's your action plan? You just had a disaster. You could be missing, a minute or two of data or something. How are you going to validate that everything is correct? Where's your plan? That needs to be there too, and you need to validate that. And I would recommend having a test where at times things don't come up the way it's supposed to be. You may have your technology infrastructure ready, but the data isn't exactly there. It's not exactly presented the way a user wants to see it. And have these users come in and say, how do I get that data again? What am I looking for? How do I validate that what I'm doing, if I start my role again, answering phone calls or inputting data or validating financial transactions, whatever the case may be, how do I know that everything there is correct? That tends to get forgotten. It always seems to be assumed that what's there is perfect. But IT can't tell you that. They can only tell you that from everything from their side looks fine. Data's there. But is it the right data? They don't know. It's only the users that are going to know that. And users have to have an action plan to validate and test and make sure everything is correct before, let's say a vice president on the client side or the call center says, yes, everybody's validated everything, we're okay. Bang, start normal operations. Well, as normal as you can be in a disaster situation, right? Take it from there. So you want to look at that. And at some point you want to get into your vendors and your suppliers, your partners. If you send something off to somebody else, what happens when you can't send it anymore? What are they going to do? How does that impact them? Or they have a disaster and they're sending something to you every day. What are you going to do now? How are you going to get that data to them, or how are they going to get that data to you if there's a broken chain between the two? I do recall we had a test at one place I used to work where we put data on a tape and drove down to downtown Toronto and gave them the tape, and they would restore and they would get the information they need. If our link between these two sites, ourselves and our partner, was gone, how would we get that information to them? A little funny note on that is one time we did test it, and the person that we were supposed to give the tape to forgot, and all the data sat on the tape and on the gentleman's desk for a day before it was actually restored, and we could actually validate we could do it. So luckily it was a test and not something real. Otherwise, there could have been some major impacts there. But you want to test, all of that kind of information too. Do I withhold my information? Do I not send anything to a vendor? Do they not send me something? What's the messages that you need to do with the external parties? All your inputs and your outputs. You have to test those as well. It's not just what's in your own four walls or your own facility. You need to test beyond that at some point. And sometimes to be able to do that, you have to be a little bit more mature in your program on what you're doing inside. We've validated our IT stuff, our communication protocols, et cetera. So now we can take the next step and go outside. You don't want to be starting off right at the beginning with, trying to test with a key partner and something not go well, and it's your very first test, and you're not going to look very good in your eyes of a partner, and your partner is going to look at you and kind of wonder, well, why are we doing business with these people? So, and I mentioned communications. Almost everything has communications, and we even had a show recently with my cousin, Jinian Sakach, a communications expert. So I take a listen to that one. There's some good information in there. You do want to validate your communication channels are there, whether it be talking to the press, the communications on social media, because that is now calculated in minutes. There used to be a time when I first started, 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago now, you had almost a day or, half a day to get a press release out. Well, that's not going to cut it now. You don't have 12 hours to do that. You barely even have 12 minutes for that. So you need to test who's going to do that. What message are they sending? You can draft some messages up ahead of time and see how it works. You can do your call tree tests, sending out messages to all your staff. This is a test. Validate the numbers, to make sure that everything works. I mentioned earlier the vice president who was sending off messages through the notification application we had tool, and he got trained on it, and we validated that all worked and it was going to the right places. We did that at another place as well, actually, a government agency tested that to make sure that it worked, and they were also validating their HR information as well and updating files when it came to that, who didn't get the message and why they didn't get the message. So there's ways of doing all those tests that you can bring all that information together and update your stuff so that, when something does happen, you've got the most current information at hand. You've also want to test, not just your facility and IT availability, like the emergency response, we've lost our building, we're going over here, IT's rebuilding our stuff, but you want to validate the people. Your people availability. And I think, I wasn't going to do this, but I think I'm going to, on one of the other shows on testing, is go through a people availability test with you. How you can validate, what happens, when a flu breaks out or a pandemic breaks out, that's usually the big one. When that happens, what do we do? How do we keep going when we've lost, a third of our staff, let's say, due to a bad flu or some sort of an outbreak? That doesn't disrupt, obviously it's a test, so you don't want to disrupt. How do we do that? And I've got some information here that maybe I'll go through. It can be fun. I've seen it done, and people have a bit of a chuckle about it, but, we'll go through that, I think. I think I'll add that to here. And you also want to validate any manual processes that you have. Anything that, if this system goes down, we'll keep doing it by fax and things like that. Well, can you do it by fax? If you've got 10 people working on something that are sending files, but you have one fax machine, can you really do it by fax? Is that, realistic? Or are you sending them somewhere else? They go into all 10 different machines around your building, and commandeering them for what they need to do. You got to test every aspect of it to find out what works and what doesn't work and identify the gaps. And when you identify the gaps, either you accept them and say that, yeah, that's the way it's going to be, or, hey, we need to fix this. We need to get this resolved so that we don't experience this. And that's the value of testing. And there you've got all the other aspects, your incident management processes, your, not just during a test, but, when you have an incident and a change is made to an application as a result of an incident, how is that getting reflected over into your disaster recovery environments and your plans, and, a change in roles and responsibility, or, anything along those lines, even when a person leaves. And I worked at one place, And when someone left, there was a questionnaire, not so much a questionnaire, it was more of a form that outlined saying this person left, these are all the accesses they had, the applications, the systems, the facilities, the floors, the phone. And each group had to go through and make sure that they removed that person from, whatever it was, if, making sure that their phone number was no longer available. Myself, actually, I had something where it was access to our alternate site. Only people who were identified to be able to go in there to restore, because it wasn't used for, people, per se. It was more of the IT component of it. That was the key piece. But there were IT personnel who had access there. So if someone left, I had to go and make sure that list, they lost their access, and the vendor knew about it, and we knew about it. All the records were updated, and validated, etc. So, you want to test every single aspect. So on that, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more talking about testing your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick. If you were listening to the last segment, I mentioned about talking about the pandemic exercise. You know what? I think I'm going to do it now while it's on my mind and give you an example of how you can test without being disruptive to operations. It is a fun test. I have seen people have a lot of fun with it. If it's not done right, it can cause a little bit of frustration for people, especially if you're not using the right words, and you'll find that out as I go through here. So the pandemic exercise, that's not a technology issue. It's not, a pandemic does not impact technology. The only way it impacts technology is if the people who are needed to support the technology are not available. If I get the flu, that does not impact, my laptop from working. My laptop doesn't work if I've got the flu and I'm not using it. Then it's not working, if you get my meaning. So a pandemic exercise is focused on people availability. So you want to know what could realistically happen if people are gone, from the workforce for any amount of time, either right away or long periods. And I know every organization has the fun time in the summer where people take, a week, 2 weeks off. There is a percentage of the workforce that's gone through the summer at all times, due to vacations, or sickness in the summer. And everyone experiences that. My current client that I'm doing some work with right now has that. People are on vacation. So what do we do? How do we keep our business going when that happens and there's a disaster? So we need to plan for that. And you can't just walk around saying, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone, because what will happen is you'll end up with, especially senior executives, because I've seen them do it, they'll turn around and say, no, I have to be here. I'm important. I'm not here. Don't include me. Just do it for these groups. Say, well, no, if we can all get colds, we can all get the flu, we all get, a paper cut. So anything can happen. You can't make the assumption that there's, some sort of a magical bubble around these people. I know, I keep going back to assumptions, and a lot of times I hear, well, IT will do this, IT will do that. And I just kind of chuckle, wondering, well, there is no magical bubble around, IT personnel. And if there is, they certainly haven't made anyone else aware of it. It doesn't happen. You can't make that assumption. And in a pandemic, there were estimates, 30-40% of the workforce could be out. That doesn't mean dead. I just want to clarify that. That does not mean, everyone's a casualty. It just means they're not available. So if that's true, 30 to 40, well, even up to 50%, could be gone. How do you validate your plans with all those people gone? Can you still operate? So with pandemic exercising, you need to pull that together and find out, can we actually do this? So it's a one-day exercise. It takes a little bit of planning on practitioners' part, and probably some volunteers, maybe from health and safety committees, who all practitioners should be involved with, by the way. And maybe I'll touch base on that on a later show. But what happens to start off with? Choose your day. When someone comes into the building, and you can tell people ahead of time, we're only going to be using these two entrances, come in. If you've got one big main entrance, well, then that helps you. But when you come in, you're going to draw a colored chip from a bucket or a box or something. Red, yellow, and green. Green is okay. You're available. You're working there. Yellow is, well, we're not sure. Maybe you're on vacation. You're, away sick, or you're still on your way to work. And red is you're not available. Right? That's the color of those chips. So when a disaster occurs that day, you're checking out people availability. What would happen? Well, everyone with green, they're in the office. They're able to help out with response activities, emergency response, and continuity activities, and restoration and recovery. Yellow, you're not sure. You don't know where they are. Who knows? They could be joining you soon. They could be, in Paris enjoying, a glass of wine. So you don't know where they are. And red is they simply are not available. Period. And when I said about wording, red could also mean that they've been a casualty of the pandemic. They're not there anymore. What has happened, and I've seen some places do it, the people will keep those colored chips, and they'll put them outside their office, or on their desk, just as a joke, or on their screen on their computer. So when people walk by, haha, you have to work, or people are chuckling. I don't. See if something happened, I can still go off and do something because I'm not available. And then I've also seen people chuckle, going, "Oh, look at me, I'm dead. I'm a zombie right now." So you can have some fun with it. What benefit you get out of that? Oh, and I guess I should tell you how you should split those up. If you've got 100 people in your organization, only have 100 chips, and split them up. If you're missing up to 50% of your workforce, then 50% of those chips are green, and you can split up the yellow and red. Maybe 30% are yellow and 20% are red. So you use those kind of percentages, but I'll leave that up to you on how you want to do that. So what the health and safety or the volunteer or the BCM practitioner does is has a list of all these people, at the entrances. And as Bob comes in and pulls a green, we just identify, oh, there's Bob on the list, and he's green. He's available. And you do that for everyone that comes in that day. And if somebody doesn't come in that day, well, they're an automatic yellow. We don't know where they are. So what you do then is you take those findings and you identify all those key people that aren't available. Now, I know of one place that did it, and I wish I could remember the lady's name. She was presenting at a conference, and she had mentioned that it was the key person that signs all the checks, and all the financial records, and would sign and hand over money, during a disaster, make money available, everything, that gentleman had pulled a red. And she said everyone was in a tizzy going, well, what do we do? Because he didn't really have a backup. So they had to go through and they identified, here's all our key people. And that's what you do in this test. Here's all our key people that pulled a red. Do we have backups for them? Are they captured, in our plans, especially those key roles? If you're responsible for signing checks, well, you want to make sure that person's got a backup. Have you lost your crisis management team leader? Yeah, we don't know where they are. Well, do they have a backup? Oh, that backup has also, pulled a yellow. Well, who's the alternate backup? We don't have one. Well, maybe, you want to look into that and start rectifying some of those issues that you find. The pandemic exercise helps identify, all your key staff, and you start plucking all the key people out because, again, you start addressing some of the assumptions, because a lot of people make plans assuming that all the key people they need are going to be there. And that's not always the case. A disaster does not pick between 9 to 5 when, Sally is on site and Sally is in charge of everything. Well, it can happen in the evening. It can happen when she's on vacation. It could happen while she's in transit, to the office or back home. You can't make those assumptions. The pandemic exercise is great for identifying where some of those gaps are when it comes to the roles and responsibilities, the roles of staff, the roles of management, the roles of the crisis teams, the recovery teams. You could even have, if we had a disaster and we had to evacuate the building, thanks to our pandemic exercise, well, half our floor wardens are gone, and now we've got people wandering all over the place not knowing what to do. So, a pandemic exercise will help identify all of that stuff, and you can then sit with your HR groups and go through, what policies do we need? If 25% of our staff or 30% of our staff is not available, for whatever reason, they're home taking care of a loved one, or they're sick themselves, are we still paying them? Are they using up vacation time? How long are we going to allow people, to be sitting at home before we have to make alternate arrangements? So all of that has to come into play when you're doing your pandemic test. Identifying what policies are in place and identifying what policies aren't in place, because you may also have people that are perfectly healthy, but they're at home taking care of a loved one who's sick. So now what happens? What policy do you have in that? Is that your bereavement, policy, or is that something else because it's a, pandemic, Spanish flu or H1N1 or H1N5, and I think there's a new one out. I can't remember its name, but there's a new pandemic that's out there, virus that's out there. So you need to match all of that, with your documented plans and identify where the gaps are. And that includes your business continuity plans. We said we would do such and such activity when we're short, IT, but can you still do that activity when the IT is there, but the people aren't? What's your alternate now? So you start finding out all of these different gaps, that a pandemic exercise can be. And like I said, it can be fun as long as you're not using some of the terminology, death and destruction, and things like that. And, you just make it fun. And I heard of one place that kind of had a little celebration. They gave everyone that pulled a red a free piece of pizza or something. It was really weird. They called them up on stage or whatever it was in their cafeteria and just kind of had made light of the situation. But they did go through and make all these changes and updates to their plans. So, So I wanted to talk to you about that while it was on my mind, and go through that with you. It can be a fun exercise, like I said. So think about it. It does a lot of good, and even, IT support staff, right? You can't assume that they're going to be available if you've got an issue. How are you going to deal with it? So think about it. Use that as an idea for one of your tests. Next week, we're going to talk about more testing. We're going to go into identifying the scope and the different various types of tests and how you capture, and document this is what we're going to do. And then on a later show, we're going to say this is what we did and this is what we're going to do about it. So next week, we'll talk about the different kinds of tests and identifying our scope. And again, if you have any questions or anything you want me to talk about or guests you'd like to see on the show, send me a note. Let me know at info@stone-road.com. And I hope this has been a great experience for you. I'll talk to you next week. In the meantime, everyone, stay prepared.
If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.